I picked up the phone to call my mum this morning, but put it down before hitting the call button. I wanted to call and tell her I knew about what happened to me, at least the medical part, but something inside of me was holding me back. It was a nagging in the far reaches of my mind that would disappear the moment I tried to focus on it, like clumps of vitreous floating in my vision, and the moment I stopped trying to think about it, there it was again, sitting in the peripherals of my subconscious, just out of reach. As always, when it rains, it pours. I could have gone without the additional paranoia added to the break-in last night, especially after having read those medical reports. I've gone around the house probably a dozen times this morning, looking for any possible clues that will direct me towards who was in my house last night. But so far, I've come up with nothing, and it's eating me alive. I'm not a locksmith, but I do know a little bit about locks and how they work, and I also know that picking locks is not as easy as it's portrayed in the countless games and movies. Not by a long shot. It takes time, even for simple locks, and especially for the kinds of locks that are used for front and back doors. It could take quite a bit of time. There are 3 scenarios that I could imagine leading up to what happened last night, and although I hate obsessing over this, I know I can't help it. First, it's possible I left the door unlocked. I'm a habitual door locker, so I don't honestly see that as being well within the realm of possibility, but still possible. Second, which is scarier, is that someone spent time picking the lock to one of my doors to gain entrance into my house. That would mean someone came to my house, prepared, and had time to pick the lock. Again, I don't find this likely, but I prefer this over the last possible scenario, which is what has me so freaked out. Third, and equally the most likely in my mind, as well as the most terrifying, someone was in my house before I got into the shower, probably even hours before. This third possibility is what prompted me to pick up cameras at the hardware store, as well as new door locks. The cameras were cheap, and I only got 3 of them in the package, but I could connect them to my phone, and I liked the idea of being able to check them wherever I was, as long as I had my phone with me, which was almost always. I spent the rest of the afternoon installing the locks on my door and setting up the security cameras. I was a little disappointed in the picture quality. It's a little grainy and the motion tracking isn't super great, but for what I paid, I think they're not half bad. As much as I wanted to keep myself busy with these projects, my mind wouldn't stop circling back around to everything to do with what I discovered yesterday. The note, the weird song, the medical records, and everything kept coming back to my mother. She knew something, obviously, and I needed to find out what she knew that I didn't. After everything was set up, I resolved to call her and try to bulldog an answer out of her. She picked up on the second ring. "Mum, I know something happened to me when I was a kid. What was it?" I came off a little too strong, I think, but it produced the response I was hoping for. Her response was a little flustered, but seemed somehow practiced. She sighed loudly, defeated, and said, "You were really sick for a long time when you were little. You almost died a few times. The doctors could never figure out what was going on, but your fevers were so high that you started to hallucinate. When you started getting better and the fever started coming down, we realized that you didn't remember anything about being sick. The doctors said it was likely because of the fevers, and we decided it was best for you not to remember, so we never told you. I felt like the worst mother in the world that year. You were in and out of the hospital with the strangest afflictions. We had an investigation opened on us to determine if we were somehow abusing you. It was such a bad year, and when you didn't remember any of it, we thought that it was God's way of saving you from the suffering you endured." What she said made sense, and I immediately felt like a rock had formed in my stomach. Hell, I'd probably do the same thing in her shoes. But again, that thing in the back of my mind floated around just out of reach. It was closer. Something about that song maybe. But still, just below the surface. I went to bed early, which is where I'm recording this now. Because, honestly, I'm just exhausted. I hope I'll be able to sleep tonight. I just woke up with a raging headache, and I feel totally exhausted, but I don't think I can go back to sleep. I had some really strange dreams, which, even as I record this, are fading back into oblivion. but I have to talk about it for as much as I remember. I feel like it's important. I was asleep in my bed when suddenly I was awake. There was no fluttering of the eyelids or stirring in my sleep. I just simply was awake. I lay there in the dark, pondering this, when I heard something on the floor below me. I sat bolt upright. I waited for a beat, wondering if I dreamt it. Then again, I heard the sound, like muffled footsteps moving back and forth below my bed. In my fear and sudden panic, my mind launched into immediate conclusions of monsters under my bed, and I had to shove the fear down before it consumed me. I knew I'd feel silly about it later, but right then, in the middle of the night, anything seemed possible. I then felt a rush of nausea so strong that I nearly retched all over my sheets. I held my breath and clenched my teeth to hold back the bile creeping up my throat, and when I was sure that I could control myself until I got to the bathroom, I exhaled and moved to get off my bed. As soon as I exhaled my breath and began to take in fresh oxygen, I realised what had made me so nauseous. My house smelled like an outhouse in the middle of summer that had long run out of lime to curb the scent of human excrement. It was a thick, hot smell that filled my nose and mouth and made my eyes sting. I knew I wouldn't make it to the bathroom, and with the instinct and speed of only a man who is moments away from throwing up, I snatched the garbage can from the corner of the room and retched hard and long on top of the tissues and candy bar wrappers that sat in the bottom of the can. The smell didn't go away, but eventually I grew to tolerate it. When I was done throwing up what felt like everything I'd ever eaten, I suddenly remembered hearing the noise downstairs. I hurried to my phone and opened the app to access the cameras I'd just set up. But what I saw on the screen momentarily made my vision blur and adrenaline release into my blood. There was a group of people, maybe a dozen or so, standing in my living room. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but there it was in the grainy black and white picture generated by the camera's night mode. I searched the crowd for faces I knew. There was something about them that seemed familiar, but I didn't know any of them. That much was sure. Wait. In the back, I saw someone who looked strikingly similar to someone I knew. But that wasn't possible. She moved around my room, and eventually the camera caught a full shot of her face. A face I would know from anywhere, because it was the face of the woman who raised me. It was my mother. I watched in a confused bewilderment as the people in the room below me moved about each other. Some of them had things in their hands, and they were doing something in the middle of the room, but I couldn't see exactly what it was or what they were holding. Too many people, and too few camera angles. I lost track of the woman I thought was my mother, and in my state of confused shock, I failed to hear the footsteps coming up to the door until it was almost too late. I heard someone approaching just before the rattle of someone turning the doorknob. I was already by the door and had the fortunate speed to grab the knob, twist it back to the right spot, and turn the lock. I hurried to my nightstand drawer and grabbed the gun and pulled the slide back loudly so that whomever was on the other side would get the message. I went to the door and put my ear against it. I could hear someone on the other side, breathing loudly, arduously. "Honey?" the voice said. It was a voice I'd heard on the phone only a few hours ago. I didn't answer at first. I was too busy doing math in my head. She lived hours away. What time was it? Almost 3 a.m. I'd spoken to her after dinner at about 7. Even if she was speeding, she would have undoubtedly had to have left her house by then if she was going to make it here to talk to me in person right now. "Mum," I said. "What's going on? Open the door and I'll explain," she said calmly, as if I were a child hiding in the bathroom after breaking a lamp. "Just explain it like this. Who are the other people?" "They're some of my friends I asked to come along. You know some of them, I think. There's Jason from the deli and Martha who lives down the street." "Mum," I said, cutting her off. "I'm going to ask this once, and I hope to God you have a good answer." I'd never spoken to my mother like this, but I was scared, and it was late, and something was happening which I could not even begin to comprehend. "What the fuck is going on?" She clucked her tongue disapprovingly. "That is no way to talk to your mother." My grip tightened on the handle of the gun. I wasn't going to use it. least of all on my mother. But it gave me confidence. "I don't care. You need to tell me what's going on right now, or I'm calling the police. Hell, I might just do that now anyway." What she said next was flat and hard, and it was grating against my soul. I wouldn't recommend that. I didn't have a chance to ask why. I'd failed to hear the sound of someone else approaching. Or maybe they'd approached the same time my mother had, and I heard a loud kick against my door, and the door frame cracked. I stepped back and levelled my gun. "Get the fuck out of my house!" I screamed. "I've got a gun and I'm going to pull the trigger on whoever walks through that door!" The cord stood out on my neck as I screamed this, and my hands shook with rage and fear. It wasn't as much of a threat as it was an honest-to-God warning. I knew I'd do it, because it would be an instant reaction. My mother could walk through the door, and I'd gun her down just as quickly as anyone else. I hoped that wouldn't happen. One more solid blow to the door, and it swung open. A large man dressed in blue jeans and a polo shirt stepped in and, just as I knew it would, instinct took over, and my fingers squeezed the trigger of the gun. Click. Nothing. Not a thing. He approached me, and I had maybe 3 seconds before he was within arm's reach. I pulled the slide again on my gun, checking the chamber, and I saw with a sickening horror that there were no bullets in the magazine. I had loaded the gun yesterday. I was sure of it. But the bullets were gone. The man's hands, big and meaty, closed around my arms as I marvelled at the empty gun in a momentary daze. I felt more hands grope me and saw at least 6 faces staring at me, wearing grimaces as the hands lifted me off the ground. I kicked and screamed and fought, but there were simply too many people. The gun clattered to the floor, and I heard someone pick it up as I was carried, fighting, out of my bedroom, down the stairs, and into the living room, where I saw lit candles surrounding an old wooden chair. The chair had shackles on the armrests and front feet. My eyes grew large, and I found a new resolution as they carried me to the chair. My feet landed a few good kicks, and I was nearly dropped. But whomever I'd kicked had been quickly replaced by someone else. They sat me down, and my hands and legs were shackled. I saw the face of my mother, her eyes sparkling in the candlelight, not with tears, but with solid determination, and I begged her to let me go. She smiled. "I'm about to." The people around me began to chant in a language I did not know, and they all stepped back, forming a circle around me. Through the crowd of people which now filled my house, I watched a small figure shuffle towards me. It was a little girl, maybe 7 or so, and I was about to yell at her to tell her to run and get help when she broke through the crowd, and I saw her face in the dim candlelight. She had no eyes. I screamed, and the world turned to black. That was the end of the dream. Even as I record this, and it fades in my memory, the dream seems so real. But I checked my door, and the door frame is fine. I checked myself for bruises, and there are none. The gun is still in my nightstand, fully loaded. Everything is where it should be. Normally, I wouldn't think much beyond that. But I woke up feeling strange, and in the time that it's taken me to record this, I've thrown up twice, and instead of seeing last night's dinner floating in the toilet water, I saw dark red syrup sinking to the bottom of the bowl, and tasted salt and iron on my tongue. My hands are starting to ache too, and I can't help but think about how these symptoms parallel the medical records I read yesterday. I think I'd better go to the hospital. Wish me luck.